Chapter 1. The Ides of March. The Roman sun, usually a comforting presence, felt harsh and accusatory as Mark Antony stumbled from Pompey's theater. Behind him, a grotesque tableau of crimson stained the marble, the lifeless form of Gaius Julius Caesar. The brutal truth clawed at Antony's mind. Caesar, the unyielding, the God-favored, lay slain by the very hands he had elevated, the lives he had spared. It was an unthinkable reality, a betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter the world. Slowly, his eyes adjusted, pulling the city into a distorted focus. An unnatural silence had fallen over Rome, broken only by the distant, frantic barks of a dog that abruptly ended in a whimper. Above, a single crow circled, its harsh cuz echoing the turmoil in Antony's soul before it drifted away. Most of Antony's entourage, his clients and slaves, had vanished, scattering like leaves in a sudden storm. Only one remained, a man named Vitalis, who now approached, head bowed in deference and fear. Master Vitalis murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Antony looked down at him, a jumble of thoughts warring for dominance. Vitalis, he managed, his hand finding the slave's shoulder. Vitalis had been part of Antony's household for years, a quiet shadow who had even seen the dust and blood of his master's military campaigns. Antony had always seen him as little more than a fixture, easily overlooked. But in this moment of raw vulnerability, Vitalis's loyalty shone like a beacon. That, Antony resolved, would change. Master, you must flee, Vitalis urged, glancing nervously at the theater's entrance. It isn't safe. Antony nodded, the words stirring a spark of his inherent pragmatism. Come. Yes, master. But first, please, take my clothes. Vitalis gestured to his simple tunic. For a fleeting instant, Antony imagined himself striding through the streets of Rome, his toga a banner of vengeance, his voice a roaring lament for the fallen Caesar. But clarity, always his ally in a crisis, swiftly returned. Brutus might have assured him of his safety, but the shifting sands of political intrigue were treacherous. To avenge this monstrous act, he needed to survive, and not just himself, but his family. Fulvia, his formidable wife, and their infant son. Antylus would be waiting, their anxiety a palpable weight on Antony's heart. History was littered with the families of the assassinated, slaughtered to silence whispers of revenge, to send a brutal message, or simply to erase any lingering threat. He had to get home. Now, without a second thought, Antony stripped off his toga, letting the opulent fabric fall in a crumpled heap. He pulled on the simple tunic and practical cloak Vitalis held out. Vitalis stood exposed, yet held himself with a quiet dignity, seemingly proud to be of service. Antony clapped him once on the shoulder. I won't forget this, faithful servant. Let's go. They hurried through the deserted streets, past shuttered shops and dwellings where the citizens of Rome, weary from years of rebellion and civil war, had wisely chosen to barricade themselves indoors rather than witness another bloody spectacle. Antony's instinct screamed at him to sprint, to run until his lungs burned, and his legs gave out, tormented by images of intruders invading his home, their knives finding his precious wife and son. But he forced himself to maintain a hurried pace, his hood pulled low over his face. He needed to appear as an ordinary slave, anxious to be off the streets, not a high-profile fugitive. Every shadow, every distant sound made him tense, ready for a fight. But the few souls still out were as desperate as he was to find refuge, giving him a wide berth. After what felt like an eternity, his gut a clenched knot of dread. His house in the Carina district, once Pompey's, finally came into view. Relief washed over him as he saw no figures battering down the doors, no smoke rising from within, no horrifying tableau of bodies. He rushed to the heavy front doors and pounded on them. A small hatch slid open. and the porter's anxious face peered out, his fear swiftly morphing into profound relief. The door swung inward, and Antony surged into the vestibule, pulling Vitalis in behind him. He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the sudden silence, and then hefted the thick, oaken bar into place. Its thud, a definitive thud of temporary safety. He strode into the atrium, shrugging off the borrowed cloak as he did so. Fulvia stood there, a pale sentinel, clutching their infant son, Antylus, tightly to her chest. Behind her, his stepchildren, Fulvia's children from previous marriages, huddled together. Little Gaius Scribonius Curio, only 6 years old, peered out from the folds of his mother's stola, his eyes wide with apprehension. The adolescent Publius Claudius Pulcher had his arm protectively around his younger sister, Claudia. Antony moved swiftly, enveloping Fulvia in a fierce embrace. With a silent gesture, he beckoned the other children to join, and without hesitation, they surged forward, forming a tight huddle. For a long moment, the family clung to each other, a silent testament to their shared relief and reassurance in the face of an unknown terror. When they finally broke apart, Fulvia's gaze searched his, her voice barely a whisper. "What is happening, Marcus? Is it true?" "It's true," he confirmed, his voice grave. "Caesar is dead." A collective sound rippled through the room. A shocked gasp from the household slaves and servants. A choked sob from one of the children. "What does it mean for us, Father?" Publius asked, his young voice trembling with fear. "Are we in danger?" "I don't know," Antony admitted, his mind already racing through possibilities. "But we must assume we are. Go and fetch my sword, and your own. I need to make sure the slaves are armed." He made to leave, but Fulvia's hand shot out, her grip surprisingly firm on his arm. "Marcus, wait. I don't understand." "There will be time later to explain," he assured her, his eyes scanning the room, assessing their vulnerability. "But much is unclear to me, too. First, we must see to our defenses." He gently placed a hand on her cheek, pressing a brief kiss to her lips, then hurried deeper into the house. In a heartbeat, Antony transitioned from concerned husband and father to a seasoned military commander. His movements were fluid, his focus absolute, as he began to take inventory of his manpower and weaponry, preparing to repel an assault with the calm assurance of a man who had mastered all 3 roles. "Video deep research canvas. Antony, a hammer and nails, now," Antony commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "Get the store boarded up, fast as you can. Get anyone you need to help." He strode into the atrium, shrugging off his cloak. Fulvia stood there, pale, clutching young Antony. Behind her were Antony's stepchildren, Fulvia's children from previous marriages. 6-year-old Gaius Scribonius Curio, peeking from behind his mother's stola, and adolescent Publius Claudius, his arm protectively around his younger sister, Claudia. Antony swept them all into a tight embrace, a long moment of shared relief and reassurance. When they broke apart, Fulvia searched his eyes. "What's happening, Father? Is it true? Caesar is dead?" A collective sound filled the room, a shocked gasp, a sob, a cry of despair from his family, slaves and servants alike. "What does this mean for us, Father?" Publius asked, fear in his voice. "Are we in danger?" "I don't know," Antony admitted, "but we must assume we are. Go and fetch my sword, and your own. I need to make sure the slaves are armed." As he turned to leave, Fulvia grabbed his arm. "Marcus, wait. I don't understand. Who is responsible? There will be time later to explain. Much is unclear to me, too. First, we must see to our defenses." He touched her cheek, kissed her briefly, then hurried into the house. He was no longer just a politician or a father. He was a military commander. Some answers finally arrived mid-afternoon with a visitor of consequence. The loud knock at the door put everyone on edge. But when the porter announced Marcus Aemilius Lepidus wished to be admitted, Antony sighed in relief and waved him in. Antony embraced Caesar's master of horse with genuine warmth. Despite resenting Lepidus's elevation to deputy dictator and having little regard for his talent, Antony had nothing against the man, who had always been an ally and friend. Technically, Lepidus was no longer master of horse, as the role lapsed with the dictator's death. However, at that moment, he was the only man with significant military power, commanding a small detachment on the Tiber Island and the sole legion in Italy. Whoever Lepidus supported that day had the greatest chance of success and survival. And he had come to Antony first. Lepidus explained that, like Antony, he had barricaded himself indoors immediately after the assassination. But once he had summoned his troops, he felt confident enough to venture into the city. He could have marched to the Campus Martis to quell the small band of gladiators the assassins had reportedly hired, but he told Antony he decided to seek the counsel of the only surviving consul Antony himself before taking any action. Antony nearly kissed him then. Like Fulvia, who sat with them, organizing food and wine, he was brimming with questions. "You were in the Senate?" Antony asked. When it happened, Lepidus looked down for a moment, tightly. He gestured to a slave for wine and took a long draught before speaking. Almost the moment Caesar entered the hall, he was surrounded by... He took his seat in the curl chair, and a dozen pressed in on him. "It was Bear who set things in motion," Antony repeated, surprised as much as anything could surprise him on this astonishing day. Lucius Tullius Bear was a hard drinker and a hard fighter, a man much after Antony's own heart. He had been a former commander in Caesar's army and had always appeared to be a loyal supporter.
As dawn broke, Antony received a steady trickle of visitors. His steward carefully screened them, ensuring none carried weapons or otherwise presented a danger. Some were close associates of Caesar, like Volumnus, whose service to Caesar was almost a living god. Some were his allies, like Gaius Cassius Longinus, a young man Caesar had been taken under his wing, and some were old friends like Attic, who offered his services to Antony and spoke glowingly of Octavius, Caesar's nephew and heir. But it was not yet time for Antony to show his hand, nor to reveal his future strategy, which was coming together in his mind. He met his visitors warmly, expressed his gratitude and sympathy, and sought to learn what they knew of the events since Caesar's death. Most were unaware of Lepidus' switch of allegiance. When he heard of it, he shrugged. It was inevitable, he decided. Lepidus had been besotted with Caesar, and though he had served the Republic brilliantly as master of horse, he had grown restless in his role. So when Caesar had given him consular power, Lepidus had accepted, showing his true color. Caesar had been skilled with the sword, but he had been a politician, first and last, Antony mused. Even his victories in Gaul or Germania had been less about glory or conquest than about increasing Roman power, as had his defeat of Pompey, which had led to his dictatorship. But Caesar was dead, and it was up to Antony now to carry on the work. His first consideration, he thought, was securing his power, and he had begun that process last night by visiting Caesar's widow. The woman had a sharp mind and a ruthless streak. Antony realized he might need her help, and she would prove a useful source of leverage over Caesar's accomplices. Antony had noticed many of Caesar's associates and friends had already flocked to the standard of the liberator. Even Caesar's adopted heir, Octavius, had courted Atticus, fled Rome, and allied himself with Cassius and Brutus. But that move seemed hasty, as if someone had persuaded him to join the conspiracy. In fact, when Cassius and Brutus had seized the rostra, they had named Octavius as Caesar's heir and sole legitimate, having previously demanded and received assurances from the tribunes that Caesar's will would be read immediately. In other words, they had put Octavius in a difficult position by making him Caesar's heir and pushing him to assert his claim. Why would they do that? What advantage did they hope to gain? Another mystery to solve, Antony thought. His third priority was his army. Lepidus was technically his superior officer, but Antony had no intention of taking orders from him, and he sensed that Lepidus felt the same. What better way to break that deadlock than a major engagement in the Forum right in front of Rome? Whoever won would establish their dominance and seize control of Rome. It was a risk, but the payoff could be enormous. Antony turned to Fulvia. "My love," he said, "we have to talk."